Hello and welcome. Today we take a critical look at one of the most dominant narratives of our time, the scaremongering threat of non-existent climate catastrophe. But first we should examine the suspect origin of this global fraud. The villainous Maurice Strong was responsible in putting climate change on the international political agenda. As the first Secretary General of the United Nations Environment Programme and organiser of milestone summits such as the 1972 Stockholm Conference and the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio, Strong cunningly manipulated and shaped early global environmental policy in highly disingenuous ways. He fabricated the notion of climate change under demonstrably false pretenses, not driven by objective science, but exclusively from political and financial motives. With unlimited backing from global think tanks such as the Club of Rome, he slyly reframed environmental concerns as a global crisis, requiring international governance. It was a massive lie. Strong's nefarious leadership of UNEP and the formation of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, involved cherry-picking scientific data to justify predetermined political objectives. He successfully reframed humanity as a common enemy via the fictitious threat of global warming in order to coerce governments towards UN solutions, regardless of the fact that the invented threat was patently false. Accordingly, the Kyoto Protocol and the Rio Earth Summit were not responses to an imminent environmental threat, but strategic tools for advancing globalist governance and curbing industrial growth. From that moment on, we've been bombarded by lurid headlines and dire warnings from mainstream media, powerful global institutions, and a captured scientific establishment. Media's fear-driven psychological conditioning is relentless. The world is on the brink of environmental disaster, and only radical action can save us from global boiling. Remember those hysterical predictions? Glaciers completely gone by 2020, coastal cities underwater by now. We were told to brace for tens of millions of climate refugees, for ice-free Arctic summers by 2013, and for an overheated planet spiralling into chaos. Entire nations declared climate emergencies, pouring billions into green energy schemes and gouging carbon taxes, all justified, we were told, by the settled science of imminent climate apocalypse. Well, what utter bollocks. Because here we are in 2025 and the world hasn't burned down on schedule. In fact, a growing chorus of meteorologists, climate scientists, data analysts, and independent investigators challenge the climate change narrative that instantly disintegrates under objective scrutiny. So is the sky is boiling panic desperately overblown? Well, let's simply check the record. Those ice-free Arctic summits, oh look, they never happened. The mass exodus of climate refugees, well, we're still waiting on that one. Coastal cities, surprise, surprise, they're still above water. But wait, there's more. In many cases, global temperatures have stabilised and the data on extreme weather events shows a decline over decades. Dr. John Christie, a former lead author for the IPCC and a respected atmospheric scientist at the University of Alabama, has been sounding the alarm, not about climate change, but about the insecure models used to predict it. He points out that these models have consistently and significantly overestimated warming, declaring we've built policy on scenarios that aren't even close to reality. And what about that famous 97% consensus? among climate scientists. This number is more myth than fact, based on selective surveys and highly questionable methodology. Respected scientists dissenting from a mainstream view find themselves marginalised, silenced, or even attacked, all in the name of consensus. Meanwhile, new research is emerging from independent scientists who assert that natural climate variability, things like solar cycles, ocean currents, and volcanic activity, are the driving cause shaping our climate. Yet these factors are routinely downplayed in favour of a narrative that blames everything on carbon dioxide, conveniently aligning with political and financial goals of decarbonisation and global regulation. So let's talk about the money. Billions of dollars now flow into climate-related research, green energy subsidies, and international conferences now derisively labelled green blobs. This overflowing pig's trough creates a powerful incentive for researchers to support the alarmist narrative. After all, that's where the lavish funding, visibility, and institutional backing sit in open-handed abundance. As many climate policy analysts put it, it's no longer about the environment. It's about driving taxes, surveillance, and control, all under the disingenuous banner of saving the planet. Governments now enforce sweeping regulations based on entirely speculative models, not observed reality. We're seeing agricultural restrictions, net zero mandates, and bans on fossil fuel infrastructure policies with devastating impacts on economies and livelihoods. Deeply troubling is the hostile intolerance for criticism and dissent. Social media platforms ferociously demonetize and censor content that questions the climate narrative, labelling it as misinformation or even hate speech. Peer-reviewed journals reject contrarian papers not for scientific flaws, but for political reasons. Dr. Judith Curry, once a prominent voice within the IPCC, left mainstream climate science over what she described as academic groupthink and the politicisation of research, complaining that the debate is hijacked by political ideology. In this era of digital surveillance, carbon tracking, and top-down energy mandates, unwarranted climate hysteria is used to justify extreme policies with generational consequences. But ever more informed citizens, along with independent scholars, are demanding transparency, empirical validation, and an end to the radically green politicisation of science. Real science, after all, is supposed to be open to scrutiny, debate, and revision. Questioning government orthodoxy, especially when it reshapes global economies and national sovereignty, is not denial, it's due diligence. Until all evidence, including dissenting voices and alternative explanations, are fairly heard, the credibility of these climate change chicken littles hurtles towards oblivion. Now let's be clear, this channel and all other sceptical perspectives have as much chance of as featuring in the mainstream media as do their colourfully cataclysmic predictions of coming true. Major scientific institutions like NASA, NOAA, and the IPCC continue to insist that climate change is real and driven by human activity. But here's a telling fact. When invited to publicly debate informed critics of the climate catastrophe hypothesis, these snivelling hypocrites never show up. If their position was as rock solid as they claim, wouldn't they welcome the chance to prove it in open debate? But they don't. And that raises a fundamental question. Isn't science supposed to be about rigorously testing hypotheses, not just enforcing orthodoxy? We must demand real evidence because the stakes are too high for anything else. But instead of informed debate, we're confronted by a phenomenon making headlines across the globe. Not for scientific breakthroughs or policy innovations, but for sheer disruption and chaos. We're talking about Extinction Rebellion, or XR as they're commonly known, a seditious movement ramping climate activism to unprecedented extremes. Founded in 2018, Extinction Rebellion burst onto the scene with a promise to shake the world awake to what they claim is imminent climate catastrophe. But here's where things get interesting and deeply troubling. Rather than engaging in the traditional democratic processes of lobbying, education, or building genuine grassroots support, XR has chosen a very different path. They've embraced what they call non-violent direct action, but their definition of non-violent is distorted at best. Let's start with their signature tactic: mass disruption of daily life. Imagine you're a working parent trying to get to your job, or perhaps rushing to a medical appointment. Suddenly, you find yourself trapped in gridlock because XR activists have decided to blockade major roads, highways and bridges. And this isn't a hypothetical scenario. In London alone, we've seen major bridges and intersections paralysed for days at a time, creating widespread delays that ripple through the entire communities. So how exactly does preventing a nurse from getting to a shift at the hospital prevent climate change? How does stopping a small business owner from reaching their store contribute to environmental protection? Well, of course it doesn't. But that's not the point for XR. The disruption itself is the message. Their Looney Tunes tactics are increasingly theatrical and extreme. We're talking about protesters who literally glue themselves to public transport vehicles, chain themselves to government buildings, or cement their hands to pavements. Think about what this means in practical terms. When someone glues themselves to a subway train carriage, specialised emergency crews have to be called in with industrial equipment to safely remove them. The delays aren't just inconvenient, they're costly, dangerous, and they tie up resources that could be used for actual emergencies. But of course it doesn't stop there. XR activists have made a habit of occupying company headquarters and government offices, refusing to leave until forcibly removed by police. They've stormed buildings, established sprawling tent camps in prominent city locations, and turned public spaces into soiled stages for their increasingly bizarre performances. And let's talk about their relationship with property damage. While XR officially emphasises non-violence against people, they've shown no such restraint when it comes to property. We've seen them smash windows of banks and financial institutions, spray fake blood on priceless works of art, and deface prominent buildings, all in the name of their completely phony cause. When confronted about these destructive acts, supporters typically argue they're targeting property as a last resort to exposed government inaction. But tell that to the museum visitors whose experience was ruined, or the small business whose windows were smashed. Perhaps most bizarrely, XR has embraced shock tactics that seem designed more for social media virality than serious political discourse. We're talking about naked protests, theatrical die-ins where activists pretend to collapse and die in public spaces, and what they call disco street blockades, complete with music and dancing while they bring traffic to a standstill. These spectacles might grab headlines, but they also generate deepening resentment from the very public they ludicrously claim to be trying to save. The movement has also made a point of targeting high-profile events, insurance conferences, sporting occasions, government summits, ensuring that delegates and attendees are confronted by angry protesters and dramatic visuals. The goal is extreme disruption and maximum media coverage, regardless of the collateral damage to ordinary people trying to go about their lives. And here's what's particularly telling. Polling consistently shows that a majority of the public opposes XR's gratuitously aggressive tactics. People cite the damaging impact on everyday life, the economic disruption to local businesses, and the sheer unfairness of having their daily routines held hostage by a small group of activists with an unhinged agenda. Yet XR leaders are unmoved by this public opposition. They maintain that previous, less disruptive efforts failed to prompt significant action, and that civil disobedience, no matter how unpopular, is a necessary tool to spark change. But has this senselessly antisocial strategy actually worked? Has alienating the general public, disrupting essential services and creating widespread resentment advanced their environmental goals? The evidence suggests otherwise. If anything, their tactics shifted public debate away from climate policies and towards questions about the ethics and effectiveness of disruptive activism. What we're witnessing with Extinction Rebellion is a case study in how radical tactics backfire spectacularly. While they've certainly succeeded in attracting global media attention and consuming substantial police resources, they've also managed to turn potential allies into lifetime opponents. Their protests sparked wide public debate, but not the kind they intended. Much of the discussion centres on whether their methods are justified, ethical, or even counterproductive. The irony is palpable. A movement that claims to be fighting for the future of humanity has chosen tactics that alienate the very communities they claim to be trying to save. They've prioritised spectacle over substance, disruption over dialogue, and media attention over meaningful change. It's worth reflecting on what this tells us about the broader climate movement. When activists resort to increasingly extreme and disruptive tactics, it betrays a lack of confidence in their ability to win through democratic persuasion and evidence-based argument. The central question is whether a movement that fails to persuade through reason and evidence should get away with egregiously disruptive actions without consequence. This becomes even more imperative when that maliciously contrived effort derives from yet another globalist deception, one more long-running assault in their controlled demolition of society. Thank you for watching.